Hello everyone, in this video we are beginning with the chapter number 21 of CMT level 2 and it's called Perception Biases. Before watching this video, make sure that you've checked the previous videos. In case you haven't, then I've linked it in the description box below. So again, perception biases is another concept inside of behavioral finance only. So the first chapter which we saw was prospect theory and now we are starting with perception biases. So we are going to see each of the four perception biases and that's given in this chapter. And we are going to see how these biases can basically affect the behavior of the investors or the traders. Now, what is the word perception? Perception is the way you look at a situation. So my perception is going to be different from yours. The way I perceive the situation might differ from the way you perceive the situation. So that is what is known as perception to begin with. And yeah, a perception bias arises when an individual has difficulty figuring out what the problem is that needs to be solved. So if a person is finding it very difficult to figure out what is the problem and what is it which needs to be solved, perception biases come in many forms. We look at several perception biases in this chapter. So to begin with, we are going to look at saliency, framing, anchoring, and sunk cost biases. These can be a little bit complicated to hear right now, but we'll go and read each one of them in detail and discuss it together. So all of these four biases have been studied by Kahneman and Tversky. Kahneman is David Cameron, and yeah, so while these four perception biases that we discuss in chapter do not exhaust the list of perception biases, these four are the most important. So you need to keep in mind that there are more perception biases in general, but we are just going to study these four for now. So the first perception biases is saliency. So let's talk about what is saliency. When we have not encountered something recently, we have a tendency to ignore that thing even if it is important to an upcoming decision. No one seems interested in buying flood insurance unless there has been a recent flood, right? So, why will I even think of buying a flood insurance? But when a flood insurance really happened, that's when it comes to my mind that, oh, flood insurance is an important thing. So, until and unless something really happens, it doesn't seem very important to us. And that is what saliency talks about. Airplane accident insurance is almost never purchased except in airports just prior to boarding a flight, though it is available to be purchased from the moment travel plans are made. When the economy has been strong and vigorous for a long time, fears of an economic slowdown records almost to the point of being completely ignored. Saliency works in two ways. If an event has not occurred recently, then that event tends to be perceived as having zero or negligible probability of occurring in the future. If something hasn't happened recently, then you just assume that this situation might never happen again. So it might never happen. So that's not a right way of thinking about. That's how human mind functions, and that is what comes under saliency. So the moment you hear the term saliency, the first thing that should come to your mind is that saliency is a is a type of perception bias. And secondly, saliency means that until and unless something is important and something really occurs right now, until then you won't assume that that is something which is very important. Okay. A dramatic example of saliency seems to take place when financial crises occur. During an economic boom, people forget that crashes can occur and underweight their likelihood of occurrence. Janali, Schleifer, and Vishny have constructed a theory of financial intermediation based upon the idea that the occurrence of bad economic states seem to be perceived as almost impossible when the economy is strong and the demand for credit is high. So, when the economy is performing well, when the government is putting out, like, let's say, favorable rules and everything is good, interest rates and everything is good, then you will almost assume that a bull market is going on and you will not even assume that a bear market might occur and there can be a crash, because something, until unless something happens, you don't realize the probability or the possibility of it to occur. So that is one theory. So the theory that uses an overweight of the probability of the bad economic state once the crisis has passed. Schaeffer's theory formalizes the idea that credit standards for commercial lending seems to decline dramatically during periods of economic prosperity, and then economic recovery credit standards are tightened up to extreme levels. The opposite pattern would be more favorable to the economy, but saliency drives policymakers and market participants to incorrectly perceive the true environment in which they are operating. So let's see what the authors state when it comes to saliency. We assume that both investors and financial intermediaries do not attend to certain improbable risks. When trading new securities, the assumption captures what we take to be the central feature of the historical episodes we describe, the neglect of potentially huge defaults in the housing bubble and of the sensitivity of AAA rated securities to these defaults, the neglect of the possibility of massive prepayments in early 1990s, or neglect of the possibility that a money market can break the buck. So that's what I'm saying. We don't perceive a particular situation on the negative side until and unless it really happens. So that is what they are saying. GSV, now GSV is what we have discussed. It is Genuinely, Shrifar, and Vishnu. So these three are very important people because they have given significant contribution to the perception biases, most importantly, saliency. GSV describes this as formalization of the notion that not all contingency are represented in the decision maker's thought process. So when we are actually making a thought process, we will not assume that the worst will happen, right? Like we might not take into account every single thing that might happen. Like right now, if I'm purchasing a house, I might take a, let's say, house insurance. Look, okay, I'm gonna take an insurance which protects me from fire accidents. That's one insurance, but that's not the only thing that can happen. I've not taken flood insurance. I've not taken earthquake insurance. I've not taken a tsunami insurance. I've not taken a construction demolishment insurance. So there are various kind of insurances which I did not consider. I only considered one thing which I thought was important to me. So sometimes we do not, we people, investors or traders also do not consider every single thing that might happen, or every single, what do you say, contingency that might occur in the future. We do not take into account every single thing, and we might really miss out on certain things which are likely to occur or maybe not likely to occur, but we just don't consider it when we are making the decision. The authors find that their model fits the financial crisis well, and that attempts to account for the crisis without incorporating this element of surprise into their model significantly hinder its accuracy. They also address other research efforts attempt to model the financial crisis. Much of the research models the crisis as an extremely low probability event, and so GSV finds that these models do not fit the financial crisis as well as the mock model incorporating saliency. Okay. So I hope you understood what the term saliency means. Saliency means that contingencies are not taken into account, and we do not always assume that the worst is going to happen. So we really don't know. Sometimes we are unprepared for certain things which might occur in the future. That is saliency. Now let's come to framing. What is framing? The correct answer to a question should not depend on how the question is phrased unless the alternative way of asking the question is truly different. The answer should be independent of phrasing or framing as to it has to come to known to in the behavioral finance. So framing is basically that no matter how a particular situation is framed, if I just change the sentence formation or the sentence framing, and if I'm just changing the way a situation is depicted, that shouldn't affect my decision making. My decision should be same no matter how in what form that situation occurs. Okay, so the simplest setting for framing is the consideration of alternative policies that involve an unavoidable loss of life. Okay, so let's look at the problem, then you'll understand what I'm saying. Imagine that the country is preparing for an outbreak of an unusual disease which is expected to kill 600 people. Which of the following problems would you favor? Program A has the effect of saving 200 people. Program B has a one-third chance of saving 600 people and two-third chance that no one will be saved. So, what do you think should is the wiser decision? Most people will choose program A when given the choice. This is the risk averse choice because at least two people are saved, right? Like at least we know for sure that two people will be for sure saved. But in the second option, either everyone is going to be saved or there is an option that nobody will be saved at all. So the policy which people are usually favoring of is the first option because at least someone is for sure definitely saved. So some sort of the economy is saved, right? So that's the way they are basically giving us this. So now consider the same problem which is phrased slightly differently. Now let's look at the problem 2. Program C, 400 people will die for certain. Program D, one-third chance that no one will die and two-third chance that 600 people will die. It's literally the same thing there. In the above one, 200 people were getting saved. What does that mean? The rest 400 are going to die, right? They have literally phrased the same to same things in a different manner. Now, framing concept basically tells us that even if the problems are phrased in a different manner, your solution should be just the same, and you should not be changing decisions just because it is being framed in a more negative manner, or just because it is using a different choice of words. Okay. In problem 2, most responses, when offered the choice, will opt for program D because program D is riskier than program C. So, risk preferring behavior will take program D over program C. Note that program A and C are identical and B and D are identical. So, why are over 70% respondents choosing A over B, and nearly 80% of the people are choosing D over C? Think about it. Their choices are inconsistent. So they basically said that this is called as invariance, that sometimes even if the questions are phrased differently, people need to take the same answer. The failure of invariance is both pervasive and robust. Pervasive means it is present everywhere in every sort of situation. It is as common among sophisticated respondents as among naive ones, and it is not eliminated even when the same respondents answer the questions within a few minutes. What seems to drive this particular example is the reference point. Problem 1 is written in the context of saving lives, but then if you talk about the problem 2, that is written from the reference point of people dying. So, like I said, one thing was negative and one thing was positive, even though both of them were saying exactly the same thing. So, respondents consider saving zero people the reference point in former and zero people dying in the reference point in the latter. The outcome choices are, of course, the same in both problems, just written from a different standpoints. But that different standpoint motivates people to make different decisions. So this is a very important concept, guys. Like you need to understand the science behind it. People just read and that might change their decision, right? Okay. In problem one, respondents think that each person they save as a gain and therefore make the risk averse choice. But then in problem 2, responders think that each person that dies is a loss, so they make the risk loving choice. Sending 400 people to their deaths rather seems draconian when the other option presents a reasonable chance that all might live. So that's the way we humans think, right? We're not AI, we're not robots. Sometimes we can't just think extremely rationally, right? We have that emotional aspect to us. Now let's talk about the problem 3. Program E. 25% chance to win 240 and 75% chance to lose 760. Program F. 25% chance to win $250 and 75% chance to lose 7 um 50. Okay. 25% chance to win 240, 75% to lose 760. 25% chance to win 250 and 75% chance to lose 750. So in problem 3, virtually everyone will choose F over E because the okay, since F dominates E because here you're losing 760, but here you are losing 750. Obviously, it's very simple, right? If someone is just winning 250 instead of 240, they might want to take that, and you are also losing less as compared to the previous one, so everybody will choose F only. Simple stuff, right? Problem 4. Imagine that you face the following pair of concurrent decisions. First, examine both decisions that indicate the options you prefer. Choose between a sure gain of $240, 25% chance to gain 1000 and 75% chance to gain nothing. Sure gain of 240 or 25% to gain this much or 75% to gain nothing, which means there is a very low probability to gain nothing at all. A sure loss of 750, 75% of the chance to lose 1000 and 25% of the chance to lose nothing. In problem 4, 73% of respondents chose A and D. A, a sure gain, and D, 75% chance to lose 1020. Okay. A and D, and only 3% chose B and C. But B and C together equate to F from problem 3. Yeah. So why do you think that happens? Because people want sure short gains, but people do not want sure short losses. People want to protect themselves, and they want to make sure that they are protecting themselves from loss. So this is what is framing. Framing basically talks about the fact that we don't want just because I'm changing the question or the way someone is asking is different. That shouldn't be changing your answers. So the first perception bias we saw was saliency, the second perception bias we saw was framing, and now we come to anchoring. Okay, I'll give you a minute. You can read this para and then I'll discuss it. Okay, now let's discuss the third perception bias, and that is called as anchoring. Anchoring is a perception bias that arises when you are attempting to make a guess at something for which you have limited information. So you have limited information about something and you are still guessing what the outcome could be. So this is guesswork. The moment you look at anchoring, the first thing that should come to your mind is that they're basically talking about anchoring. An anchor biases your guess in the direction of the anchor. The famous example of anchoring comes from attempting to guess the number of jelly beans in a jar. Staring at a jar, it would be difficult to imagine how to even begin to guess the number of jelly beans that can be stored in the jar. But imagine that just before you attempted to guess the number of jelly beans in the jar, someone says, "Wow, there are 1,000 stars in the sky." Would that influence your guess? Would your guess be closer to 1,000 after such a comment? Suppose the comment were made instead, "Wow, there are 10,000 stars in the sky." Would your guess be significantly larger if the anchor was 1,000? Experiments using a single jar of jelly beans have been conducted numerous times in separate classrooms and separate responders. Very different estimates arise from respondents in each room, and the average estimate of each room is based in the direction of the anchor that applied to that room. Do you understand what I'm saying? When someone says something which is a little bit related to it, then everyone starts to say that only, and that really, so your environment really affects the decision you're making, which is why in the first room people were saying 1,000, but in the other room people weren't saying 1,000. So your environment is something which really affects you, and anchoring, whatever anchor you put, usually your guess is going to be in the direction of the anchor. What is anchor? Anchor is the limited information which you have. A similar bias can occur in the context of historical guesses. Suppose one plans to ask what century Galileo lived in. Just before posing the question about Galileo, one says Columbus discovered America in 1492. If one compares respondent guesses when 1492 is the anchor, the Magna Carta was signed in 1215. The group that hears 1492 will place Galileo closer to the end of the 15th century than the latter group, and they will basically put it near the 13th century. Now, why does that happen? Because that anchor which you heard is going to influence the decision you make. The hint which was given to you, whatever decision you make, it will be basically biased, or it is going to be for sure affected by the anchor or by the thing which has been given. So, anchoring can be characterized as an example of lazy thinking, but there is a possible reason for that lazy thinking. Often, limited observations can provide a reasonable basis for an estimate. One of the most famous examples of this is the secretary problem. Generally, this describes any situation where there are n objects drawn in succession if they are all seen together and so on. So this is how you basically look at anchoring. So anchoring is when you're given a hint, then your decision is being affected by the hint. Sorry. Okay, now let's read this particular example. Consider a situation where there are 10 monetary prices available and you get to observe each price one by one. As you select one of the prices and learn how much money there is, you are given a choice. You may take the money and then the game ends, or you can reject it, in which case the prize is discarded and you move on to the next prize. Once you get to the last price, you must of course accept it as there are no other remaining prizes left. So in this 10 price situation, what is your best strategy? Remember that the only information you have are the price values you have seen. Any arbitrary amount of money can be contained in the 10 prices. Clearly, you need to gain some information. The question is how much information you should gain before making a selection. After all, each price that you discard means that you no longer have the price, even if it was, let's say, the biggest amount. Okay. This is a classic optimization problem, and the optimal strategy is to select the first three prices, observe the dollar amounts in each price, and then discard each of them regardless of their values. Then consider the fourth price. If its value is greater than what was observed in each of the first three prices, then accept the price, and then the game is over. If not, reject it and continue until you do find a price of an amount that was greater than what you saw in the first three prices. That is how people will do, right? That's the way you are going to make a decision, right? There is a probability that one of the first three prices is the largest price, in which case you will end up gaining the last of the 10 prices selected, regardless of its dollar value. Note that in some sense you are anchoring your ultimate choice by examining the first three prices. In this process, you have constructed a rational anchor. It just might be the experience with rationally selecting anchors in the manner of this. Irrelevant anchors are latched on in the absence of any other information. Okay, that is a good example. So until now, we saw three perception biases. The first was saliency, and then we saw framing, and then we saw anchoring. Now you are going to see sunk cost bias. Now we are going to start with what is sunk cost bias. Imagine you pay 200 for a non-refundable, non-transferable ticket to see a great country and western singer, your favorite, perform next Thursday. But when Thursday rolls around, you no longer want to go. You've decided you don't like that singer at all. After all, you try to give away your ticket or sell it to no avail. So, do you go to the performance even though you no longer think you would enjoy it? Traditional economics says that a rational person will choose not to go to the performance. You might feel bad if you don't go to the performance because you will regret having wasted $200, but feelings of regret are not part of the makeup of rational person typically assumed by economists. Utility is derived from consumption, not from wistful look back at about things you wish that you had done or not done. Feelings of regret play no role whatsoever in traditional economic analysis. An economist normally argues that paying for something and then using it are two entirely different decisions. The decision to pay for a ticket to attend a future event is based on expectations about the utility of that future event. Having paid for the ticket, once the future event arrives, you must make a new decision. Should you go or should you not go? What you paid for the ticket earlier should be irrelevant, economists argue, to the decisions to attend. So that's what the economists think, that that's the way a rational person or a rational consumer makes decisions. Okay. The ticket is viewed as a sunk cost that is an entirely separate event from the attendance at the concert for which the ticket was purchased. So sunk cost bias means that the event bookings for something is a different event and actually going and attending it is a different event. Classifying sunk cost as a perception bias is questionable. The sunk cost bias involves something left out of the utility function, which most of us know probability does affect decisions. Regret. People feel regret for the things done and not done, but such things are in the past, and since they cannot be changed, they should not influence a current choice. Does having bought a ticket in the past make today's attendance at a concert more pleasurable? Not likely. Okay. So now let's look at this. A slight variation of the sunk cost bias is the situation that arises if you lose your 200 ticket on the way to concert and are faced with having to purchase or not purchase another ticket. Suppose in this case you do want to go to the concert and then you lost the ticket. You had lost $2,000. Okay, let's say you're going to the concert, you lost $200 rather than the ticket which you purchased for 200. You might react differently about these two situations. Where money is lost, you might not associate the lost money with concert, and therefore you might be more likely to pay 200 for a ticket rather than if you recently lost a ticket to the concert of the same value. So this is what is known as mental accounting, right? For me, losing a ticket and losing $200, both are two different events, even though the price of the ticket was also just the same. Because sunk costs involve regret, the bias that results is similar to the bias investor shows are reluctant to purchase a stock after missing out an opportunity at a cheaper price, right? So these were the four perception biases. Okay, quickly if we revise the four, first one was saliency. What is saliency? Saliency means something which has occurred recently that will be more important for you. Then you have framing. If the question changes or if it's framed in a different manner, your decision shouldn't be changed. And then we have anchoring means if someone anchors a particular thought in and around you, then your decision is affected by it. And then we have sunk cost bias, which means that the event which was booked before and the event that is going to happen, both are different events. And regret is something which takes into account and something which is related to mental accounting. Now let's conclude the chapter. Perception biases run counter to the normal utility maximization paradigm that permeates economic and finance theory. Emotions, to the extent they matter in traditional economics and finance, have their impact on the utility function, which is presumed to be a function only of expected consumption or expected net worth, where net worth is obviously a proxy for future consumption. But in real life, psychologists have found that emotions do play a role in how problems and the impact of choices are perceived. Those perceptions can be altered even when the plain substance of the problems or choices are unchanged. Okay, you can pause it and you can read this. However, we have just discussed the entire thing. So that's it with this chapter. Check the description box below for a link of the entire playlist.